Actually, before Mark speaks, we actually thought it might be helpful also to have you hear from David Spiegel, who's really thinking about the mind-body connection that Mark kind of alluded to earlier when he talked about his patient. So from a different perspective, thinking about the role of inflammation, stress, immunity in breast cancer.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here. My research program at Stanford over the last 35 years has been devoted to finding out to what extent Mark has been lying to his patients. We started support groups with women with advanced breast cancer to see whether we could help them live more fully, even in the face of a life-threatening illness. And many people were worried that we would make them worse rather than better. But we got these women together in the same spirit that Laura Evans and her group encouraged one another. We saw them encouraging one another. We met once a week for 90 minutes. We talked about fears of dying and death. The acronym for what we tried to help them do is the word FACES, and the F is for facing rather than fleeing. Many people thought that if you put together in a group women who were dying of the same illness, we'd demoralize them. Well, death is not a novel concept to a cancer patient, despite the fact that more than half of all people diagnosed with cancer now will live to die of something else. Everyone who's diagnosed with it thinks it's going to kill them, and we found that it strengthened them. And I can tell you that the inspirational hike that those women took were an inspiration to the women in our support groups. To give you an example of how well they dealt with this, one of them said one day, "My husband is absolutely worthless at planning anything, and I'm going to have to make my own burial arrangements." So she called up Skylawn Park, a very beautiful cemetery overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and asked what it would cost to be buried there. And they quoted her some astronomical amount of money. You know, real estate in the Bay Area is very expensive. And she said, "Well, you know, actually I represent a group of women who are looking for a place to be buried. Can we get a discount?" And the woman said, "Skylawn Park does not offer group discounts." And all the women in the group had a good laugh about trying to get a group discount in a cemetery. So I was convinced that they could deal with anything. And the second, the A in FACES, is to find a way to alter your perception of your situation, to see it not just as the end of your life, but an opportunity to live your life more richly, as Laura did, to alter your perception of pain and anxiety, sadness, and the C is to cope actively, to find something you can do about any problem you're dealing with. And for these women, for many of them, it was changing their priorities in life. It was learning to if they couldn't do anything about the fact that they might die of the illness, they could do a lot about how they lived before they died, or how they died. The E is for expressing emotion, and we spent a lot of time encouraging them to express emotion. One of my patients started to cry, and her husband said, "Don't cry, you'll make the cancer spread." We called that the prison of positive thinking. Suppressing emotion is a bad deal. You suppress all emotions, happy as well as sad, and emotion is your friend. It helps you identify what it is that's troubling you and allows you to deal with it and draw closer with others. The S in FACES is social support. We are social creatures. We do better physically as well as psychologically when we're together with other people. People who are socially isolated have a twofold elevated risk of mortality from cancer and from other illnesses as well. It might interest you to know that the kind of social support that's good for you if you're a man is being married. If you're a woman, it's not being married. It's relationships with other women. So I have to conclude that having a relationship with a man does your health no good at all, regardless of your own gender, and having a relationship with a woman does your health a great deal of good, regardless of your own gender. These women met for 90 minutes for a year. We gave them a whole bunch of psychological tests. We found at the end of a year that they were less anxious and depressed. They were managing their emotions better, although they were not suppressing them. They had half the pain they had at the beginning of the group, and we felt pretty good about that. But things in the pop literature were suggesting that if you just wish away your cancer, if you picture your white cells killing your cancer cells, very much in the manner of the elegant lecture that you just gave, that somehow it would happen. And what it was doing was making people feel guilty for not having visualized well enough. So I thought, you know, we have another experiment here. It was a randomized clinical trial. We went back and looked at what happened to these women 10 years later. And much to my surprise, the women randomly assigned to our support group lived 18 months longer than control patients. By 48 months, all the controls had died. A third of the treatment sample were still alive. And we published that in The Lancet in 1989. It aroused a lot of attention. Some people couldn't believe it. Others said, well, of course, why not? There are now 15 randomized clinical trials. 8 of them show that emotional support in a setting like this is associated with longer survival with a variety of cancers. 7 others show no difference. I'm very happy to tell you that there's not a single trial that shows that psychotherapy kills patients. So the trials aren't random, and they do suggest that living better may help you to live longer. And one of the main reason I'm here, I'm honored to be here, is to learn more about how that might be. What effects could the way we handle stress and dealing with depression have on the way in which the body can cope with cancer? We have evidence that depression, particularly chronic depression, predicts poorer outcome with breast cancer and with other kinds of cancers. We have found in trying to understand this mind-body connection that stress is also associated with abnormalities of a major stress hormone called cortisol, which elevates sugar in the blood, prepares you to fight or flee. Waking up in the morning is a daily stress task. Your morning cortisol levels were about 4 times higher than they should be right now. But with depression, it tends to stay high. And we found that many of our breast cancer patients had cortisol levels that stayed high throughout the day. And that also turned out to be a predictor of shorter survival with breast cancer, independent of all the other known risk factors. Cortisol is immunosuppressive. We use corticosteroids to treat the autoimmune diseases that were mentioned. And so we're trying to understand now what the effect of this abnormal cortisol might be. We've learned that it is associated with lower levels of natural killer cells. Dr. Lippman many years ago was among the group with Ron Herbermann that discovered these cells which kill transformed and dying cells. So these abnormalities of stress hormones are associated with lower levels of these natural killer cells. We're also very interested in the myeloid-derived suppressor cells that tumors seem to mobilize to inhibit the immune response and inhibit the body's ability to fight cancer. There are more of them in depressed cancer patients. So we're hoping to learn more about how it might be that teaching patients through group therapy to live better might also help them to live longer. And I'm honored to be here and hope to learn a great deal about how we can direct our research about this in the future. Thank you.